All right, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I am thrilled to be here today. I'm Julia White, by the way. My day job is to lead the business side of Azure, but I have the opportunity to have a dialogue with Justin from Scotiabank, which I'm thrilled to have here. And he has been at Scotia for 16 months, so just a little bit over a year. And he says he's assimilated, but I think he probably isn't fully assimilated yet. But certainly, been an opportunity to work at a number of different organizations, from Barclays, GE Capital, fintech startup, and then IBM and Chef. So you've had a very checkered past.
Indeed, I have.
But it certainly
it's all culminated in me speaking here.
That's right. This is the pinnacle. But certainly opportunity to work in software companies, open source orientation, then a lot within the financial services. So that's my version. I'd love to hear a little bit more you talking about your background.
I could make it challenging for you and just say, no, you nailed it.
Okay, well then we can move on.
I think that my whole career has really been interested in how how technology changes how we can do business, and particularly how our business needs to change in order to be able to exploit the benefits of technology. Because we often think that we can take the new thing, Azure, to pick a random example, and we can just adopt it and everything will be fine.
That's true, right?
Well, yeah, no, isn't it? Come on. So a whole bunch of Microsoft salespeople going, get him off. So
He promised us to be honest.
Right. So and it turns out you can't. It turns out that your organization has to make some changes in order to be able to, exploit the new technology. And my entire career has been, I suppose, messing around with that basic idea. And I think it's one of the great challenges, and the reason for that is there's just no silver bullet. There really isn't. Organizations are different, people are different, the technologies are different, the rates and the appetites for risk and change in organizations are different. The different cultures that you work in a global organization drive different dynamics, and I just find that whole thing fascinating. So technology is about people, it turns out.
It's a funny thing.
Yeah.
Now, your current role, a little bit about kind of the remit you have in your current position now.
So I run a part of the organization called the Platform Organization. And what the Platform Organization is an organization that is a platform.
Discuss.
Yes. We paid some people for the marketing. We came up with that name. No, we didn't really. We actually crowdsourced the name, ironically. And so we created a platform called Plato. And so Plato is a software platform that my organization builds and runs and helps our users and customers in the organization to build on. And what Plato is essentially a set of technologies that takes care of all of the complicated bits that you need to take care of in a large organization in order to be able to safely build an application. So what are the APIs you should use? Where is the data? Do we have a single customer view? How do you get to that? How do you deploy to cloud safely? What are the security requirements? How do you implement data leakage protection? How do you de-tokenize and re-identify data once it's been egressed from the cloud? All of those kinds of questions, these basic things that we all have to do when we build applications for our businesses. And so that applies certainly to the new applications and the web and the mobile applications that we build, but it also applies to the traditional applications. So what Plato is, and I think that this is interesting and a little different to some other approaches that I've seen in the market, that is, we're not just focused on creating new fancy apps with new fancy technology. We're also interested in understanding how we can build a set of new technologies that can enable the migration of capability from legacy applications, legacy code bases, written in COBOL, RPG, those kinds of things. And how do we bring them into the modern world? So how do we get them into a continuous delivery, continuous integration, DevOps kind of model? And so, fundamentally, Plato, what we like to say in the organization is, we are the little engine, we're the engine of modernization for Scotiabank.
All right, I'm going to dive more into Plato in a second, but I want to get your perspective on, you've spent a big chunk of your career in the conversation, in the intersection of finance and tech, and curious about what's drawn you to that combination.
Well, I mean, is there anything more exciting than banking? I mean, really, come on. A lot to be said for an industry that hasn't fundamentally changed in, a long, long time. If you have a small group of people working in a garage making cool things, that's awesome. And that's a certain kind of engineering problem that it opens up for you. I think the engineering problems that we have in financial services today are absolutely fascinating because they're at the interface between regulation, which is coming fast and furious, at the interface, as I previously said, of people and how you are working with people who have been working in this organization for the last 20, 30, 40 years, and then this incredible rate of change of the technology itself. And I don't think you find that really anywhere else. And so, it's always been fascinating to me, particularly when we think about regulation, where, often regulation and regulatory change is shown as in some way something that holds back innovation in financial services. And I would say that that's not true. I actually think that the regulations that we're seeing coming down from regulators to make our customers safer, to make the industry more stable, are forcing us to innovate in ways that we wouldn't have otherwise. I think that innovation from a regulatory point of view is, for me, absolutely fascinating. And one of the things that we know, if you come from a software engineering, DevOps kind of world, we know that going slow isn't safer. Right? So doing these massive big releases and thinking, no, it's okay, if it takes you a year to fix something, it's safe. Turns out that's nonsense. Because we have to be able to respond the next hour, the next day. And so we need to start building processes that are able to adjust and implement new regulations at velocity and respond to external threats at velocity. And so it turns out, and I think this is one of the great things that you're seeing in all of the banks that are working in this space, is really beginning to get to the core of faster is safer. Velocity of software development is safer. That's how banks are safe, by ensuring that they have to build the security and the processes that drive that stability and safety into the core of their development practices. And of course, we have a product within Plato called Accelerator, which we're talking about tomorrow. And Accelerator is essentially an embodiment of that principle, of that idea.
So that seems quite different than a lot of the more regulated companies I talk with, who tend to say security and regulation is the thing that impedes keeping up with technology, moving more quickly. You've completely flipped that on its head. So how have you actually gotten your organization to kind of see that worldview?
Well, the common phrase that you hear from security organizations is security is everybody's responsibility. And I'm sure some people, when they hear that, roll their eyes. But the reality is we literally have to build that responsibility, those checks, into absolutely every single step of the process. Now, what is interesting is if you take an existing set of processes that are, for argument's sake, 20 years old, and you start applying new technology or new ideas to them, and you think that you're going to take the same process, but you're just going to do it faster, you've misunderstood. So what this forces is it forces an exchange between committed professionals in the engineering environments and the security environments and the regulatory environments to start saying, okay, what actually are the risks? Do we understand the risks? How do we mitigate the risks? How do we manage them? What can technology make available to us that it previously wasn't able to? Has our understanding of the threat landscape changed? And it's these conversations that happen that I think in an organization, when you assume the somewhat static, never changing risk landscape, it just doesn't, these conversations don't happen to the same depth. And so the direct answer to your question is we've had some great partnership across the organization, from security and our regulatory advisors, to really understand what are the risks that we're trying to protect, how do we protect our customers, how do we protect the bank, what does that mean, how does the new technology enable us to do it better?
Got it.
While still driving customer value at velocity.
Got it. So you very much taken those key stakeholders on the journey of understanding the technology, understanding the threat landscape, so they can really understand why it's actually maybe the reverse of what they would naturally bring to that discussion.
Yeah, and I think that it's true to say that this environment that we're in requires education on all sides. The technology stack itself is evolving so fast that we are continually obviously learning. And using the new features that are available and prioritizing the investments in the various technologies. And at the same time, the threat environment is also changing. And so it's education both ways that has, we would like to think, produced a pretty good solution.
Got it. Now you've come into your role and brought what you described as a kind of a very product mindset into the organization. So interested in understanding what that, coming into the bank, coming with a product mindset, what that's looked like, and then we'll walk through kind of some what the change around that's been.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the use of the word product in a bank is an interesting choice, because banks historically have been very product oriented. So banks historically have been interested in selling you a banking product, a current account or a credit card or a product. And of course, what banks, and certainly Scotia is very committed to this, are interested in doing these days is being customer focused, being more interested in what are the customer needs, and understanding what the customer needs, and then understanding the products. This sounds like pretty sensible business behavior. And so when you use the word product in a bank, we need to be clear that what we're actually talking about is not a product in that banking sense, but actually it's moving software engineering one step up the maturity curve where actually very customer-focused businesses have been for some time, which is asking, what does the customer want? How many large IT organizations, large technology functions do you know can really be said to be as focused on their customer as if they were a software company? And so the platform organization, we like to think of ourselves as a little software company inside Scotiabank. And so we think of ourselves in terms of what are we building, who's going to use it, who's willing to pay for it, what job is it doing for our customers that needs to be done, as opposed to a skunk works off on the corner where we go away and come back 9 months later and say, oh, we've built this incredibly cool thing. And everyone goes, okay, what problem does it solve for me? And so if you start thinking of yourself as a technology function, as a software company, it changes your mindset. And so what we are implementing in our organization are some very formal, and we've spoken to your colleagues at Microsoft in the product development areas, and we are really implementing some very, very formal product development practices. And so those product development practices are the same practices you would find in any other software organization. And so that's made us more customer intimate. It's made us understand the economics of technology, the economics of our products better. And that's also enabled us to make a better value proposition for our customers, for our users.
That sounds awesome, but I imagine you didn't just show up and snap your fingers and everyone started thinking like a software company within the bank. So I'd love to hear the real change that had to happen and what, kind of probably lessons learned through it.
No, it was just a snap of the fingers, really.
It's done, really.
So, look, the issue of driving change in large organizations is, of course, the subject of many books.
Yep.
And I'll try and keep my answer shorter. But the issue is, if you want to drive change, you have to give people an example of what the change looks like. So very often we say, okay, we're going through a change. We're going to implement cloud, and we're going to do DevOps, and we're going to do all these things. And everyone goes, okay, maybe, I guess. Sounds okay. But I have no idea what you mean. What does this future world look like that you are asking me to commit to? And so if you're trying to change a large organization, so Scotiabank has 90,000 employees, so you're trying to change a large organization, the way you change it is not by changing the whole organization. The way you change it is by creating examples of what that successful change looks like in smaller slices. So imagine you were doing a lean manufacturing process, right? Small batches. So what we have is we have managed, as an organization, the platform organization, to achieve small wins.
Okay.
And each iteration of those small wins, we have improved our practice. And so we have attempted to continuously improve. And our interface with our customers is continuously improving. But also the example that we can show of this is what we think a good architecture for a cloud-native app looks like. This is what we think a good architecture for a package-oriented, non-cloud-native app running on the cloud looks like. This is what the team structure actually looks like. This is what the economics feel like in the migration. All of this improves, and we're able to point that to people to that example to say, okay, when we talk about operating in this platform-oriented way or in this product-oriented way, that's what we mean.
Okay.
Go speak to these 20 people who have just implemented an internet bank on Plato. That's kind of what we mean. And so it's creating small examples that you can then begin to scale across the organization. And I think one of the critical things in driving change is to understand that at the beginning you don't know the questions to ask. And I think a lot of organizations will tend to run to an organizational solution very fast.
Okay.
So I'm sure many of you in the audience you have this new thing and it's cloud, and so what we're going to do is we're going to create an organization. We have a DevOps organization, we have a cloud organization, we have a this, we have a that. And that's not to say you don't need organizational structure, but organizations don't solve cultural change. What you have to do is you have to create an example that role models I think in a fairly humble way, this is how we think it works, and this is where we need to improve, and this is how we continually improve, and you all that we're doing it with are part of that conversation. And I must say that process has been extremely effective at Scotiabank, and one of the advantages of that is the support that we have for this kind of initiative literally comes from the top of the house. Okay. So, our CEO, Brian Porter, has said publicly that we're a software company that just happens to be in financial services.
Okay.
And so it's that support for just understanding the organizational and the technology changes that we have to make in order to better serve our customers as a bank. And so that support is, I think, a really important part of our success. But I think we've capitalized on it in small steps.
Got it. So had the mandate in the air cover, but you earned
Absolutely.
it by kind of showing people what it looks like and then repeating and rewarding that along the way.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations I often have with customers of, the central organization like yourselves versus having it distributed within the product lines or the business groups, and interested in how that works at Scotia, and I'm guessing it's changed over the years too.
Yes, I mean, the issue of anyone who's been working in technology for some time knows that the issue of centralization and decentralization is like a pendulum. I don't know where we are in the cycle right now, but it swings from centralization to decentralization being in vogue. And perhaps what we've tried to do is break out of that cycle and say, well, there needs to be a point, an organizational center of gravity where people work on some of these common problems. And that's the platform organization. And so we try and identify these common problems if we're able to do it in a custom, intimate way, using these product development approaches. That keeps us honest, and it keeps us solving real problems. But that doesn't scale. And I've seen a lot of transformation efforts in previous places fail because the point where it starts is the point that everyone needs to go through for the future. So what I mean by that is, if the platform organization, if my team, if the Plato team always has to be involved in all of the use of Plato, we'll never scale it across the 55 countries that Scotiabank is in. I mean, the analogous example would be, well, if Microsoft wanted PowerShell to take off, but in order for anyone to write any PowerShell, you had to work at Microsoft, pretty sure PowerShell wouldn't have taken off, right? And so the same thing goes for our platform. Our job is, although we are the center point, our job is to enable our customers. I think success for us is shrinkage, not growth. Success for us is creating an organization that is so enabled to write the kind of applications, to implement the practices, and to contribute those practices back to the code base. So using open source type practices, that we are able to do less. And so we are some way from that because we're dealing with a lot of new technologies. But the principle has to be, how do you scale that change? Because remember also, if you are enabling the organization at the edge, what you are also picking up through that enablement is you're picking up requirements that otherwise you wouldn't have gotten. And so, a phrase that we've used before internally is productize the core. What are the core requirements? Let's try and productize that. Productize the core, but accelerate the edge. So we want to enable our developers in the individual countries to be moving as fast as possible, as safely as possible. And so for that, we have to think of ourselves just like a software company. How do we give you the skills you need, the documentation that you need, the mentoring you may need, et cetera, so that you can do it on your own?
Got it. All right, so let's dig in a little bit to the platform that you've built, and I'd love to understand what the genesis of that was and what how it's evolved over the past time.
Well, the platform essentially, really started with cloud, and I think what was very clear to us, particularly given that we have a multi-cloud strategy, what was particularly clear was that the location or the provider of the cloud is not actually the issue. It's not the driving force behind the value that you get from cloud. So the phrase that we like to use, and I'll explain what I mean by that, the phrase we like to use is cloud is a method, not a location. And so what that means is the fact that you happen to be deploying to Azure is interesting, but the location of that data, the fact that it's not in your data center, is not the issue. The fact that you are methodologically able to programmatically control access to those resources, that's the point. The fact that you're able to use that programmatic control of resources in a continuous delivery approach, continuously testing, continuously pushing changes, that's a methodological change from how most on-premises based infrastructure works. And so cloud for us is as much about adopting these high-velocity development pipelines which happen to terminate in the cloud as anything else. Because the reality is, and I'm sure some of you have been through this, I would say probably about a decade ago when cloud was still a little younger, a number of organizations, both for their on-premises implementations as well as public cloud, were very, very quick to put up portals which allowed you to spin up an environment for your dev and test in 5 minutes. And so you would spin up these environments for 5 minutes, probably on a VMware image or something like that, maybe, and you'd spin it up and you'd have it, and your developers would now have access to this environment, and everyone would go, wow, that's fantastic. Okay, so I've got my new dev environment in 5 minutes. I'm still only going to deliver anything to the customer every quarter, though. So what have you gotten? What did you really win? Then what also became interesting was that standardized image was then looked at by the developer. The developer starts doing what developers do, which is innovative and creative things and asking for new stuff. And then, of course, the process for changing that image wasn't automated. And so even though you got it in 5 minutes, the changes still took you 3 months to get. And so what this cloud as a method, not a location, really means is building pipelines which allow you to safely manage the change continuously, both from the point of creation of environments all the way through to the running, deployment, and operation of those environments. And so that is a fundamental change for us. And I think that that has been central to how we develop the platform. Because starting with cloud, we then built on top of that development, and then you start asking yourself what those development tasks, those activities, what kind of developers are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about application developers who need APIs. So we have a whole suite of reusable APIs across the organization. But okay, so we've got these APIs for these application developers, but what about people who are wanting to really get into the data? So we have well-defined data endpoints and APIs, microservices for accessing data, where we have critical data elements and primary sources of data identified. These things, including the APIs, are then searchable on a portal which developers can then look through. And so this is essentially us attempting to build an ecosystem of development tools for engineers to build applications and get the basics out of the box, as it were.
Okay.
And so I would like to think that we built our platform driven by demand. So when we started, it was a little bit of cloud and, a little bit of pipeline. And over the last year and a half, it's turned into a lot of cloud and a lot of platform and a lot of security. So, as part of Plato, we also have then some centralized security services and, authentication for our customers and all that kind of thing.
Got it. So you really coupled your move to the cloud model, not just say the cloud, and DevOps, and you kind of mix those together as how you think about it. Really, as you're taking advantage of those public cloud capabilities, but it's really about the agile development approach that went with it. So use that as it looks like a very conscious coupling of those two things.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the word digital transformation gets used a lot.
It does.
The word digital gets used a lot, and the word transformation gets used a lot. And you put the two together, and no one knows what you mean. And so, for us, how we think about it is digital transformation, to coin a phrase, it's the shortening of feedback loops. That's fundamentally what it is. You're creating an organization that shortens the feedback loop between you as an application developer or engineer and the end customer. How do you see what the customer sees, understand what the customer is looking at, respond to it to make your stuff better? And then working together as a group of engineers, professionals, managers, coaches, whoever happens to be in this team, how do you shorten the feedback loops between yourselves? Because it turns out, if you want to shorten the feedback loop between you and the customer, you have to shorten the feedback loop between you and the other people who are involved in the supply chain of delivering the application. So digital transformation, when all is said and done, isn't about pretty websites. It's not about cloud. It's not about DevOps. It's about shortening feedback loops. And that's a hard thing to do in a large company. It's a large thing. It's a difficult thing to do in a small company. So a lot of what we focus on in Plato is not only the technology, as I said earlier, it's the people, it's the practice that goes around how do we think about the delivery of this application in a way that makes us challenge how do we get that feedback faster from each other and from our customers.
Now you've taken a multi-cloud approach. So interested in kind of how you think about that, decisions on how you decide what goes where and how things are run.
Well, I mean, if you take this approach of cloud as a method, not a location, the multi-cloud approach essentially recommends itself. And what I mean by that is, if the cloud is essentially a function of the kinds of resources that you want programmatic control over, so some of the capabilities that we get from Azure, like the scale sets, things like that, okay, well then they become capabilities in the development tools that you're providing available for application developers. Okay. And there will be other clouds with other functions. So some of the interesting work that Azure is doing around serverless computing, I think, will certainly be something we'll be looking at. And there are other functions from some of the other cloud providers out there. The point is that the multi-cloud approach, if we are taking this accelerator-oriented approach, which is what our product is, our development pipeline product, if we're taking this pipeline-oriented view of cloud, it then means that we're able to pick the best provider based on the native capabilities of that cloud for our particular customers' workloads. And I think you're beginning to see some difference and some different strategic positioning between the different cloud providers. And I think that that's an intelligent thing for an organization to be able to take advantage of, so that we can play with you where you are strongest.
Got it. So within your organization, so I get this question a lot about multi-cloud and how to do it well. And so do you literally have, hey, for this set of capabilities or this type of application, app dev work, use this versus that? Or is it kind of like, hey, we have these set up and we let developers decide? Or how does it work in the real world?
So much like a software organization with a services component, which is what we have in our organization as well. So we have a professional services organization run by my friend Ryan over there. And that professional services organization works on intake. with our customers. So customers approach us and say, well, we're interested in moving this application, or we're interested in developing a new application, or whatever the case may be, and our team works with them to work out what the appropriate route is. I mean, ultimately, where we want to get is we want to get to a point where none of it matters, where it's all completely transparent, but we're not there yet. And I think that that is a big challenge. But clearly, what I will say, though, is that self-serve and building self-serve capabilities, so the self-serve ability to be able to set up a repo, to provision something to Cloud Foundry, let's say, to provision something to Azure, to automatically provision an Azure SQL database, something like that. These self-serve capabilities are things that we have in many cases. So self-serve is a big focus for us, and it's something that we're going to continue to focus on because that is part of the scale argument. It's part of how we enable our customers to be able to do some of the basic things with as little touch from us as possible. So they can go and create a repo and understand how to deploy an application and use an example application to begin to get the hang of it, and then they can reach out to us if they want more specific help.
Got it. And another question I hear a lot, so I'd love your perspective on it, is as you move to using cloud and having that as the default approach, what does it mean from the changes on the team, a mindset, a skill set, people have to shift jobs, like do people get laid off, like the whole spectrum of things, like what did that look like?
So I think one of the myths in this digital transformation world, let's continue using the term because we all know what we mean. One of the myths is that there are these unicorns that you can go hunt and hire and everything will be okay. And that's just not true. And if you're in a very large organization, or not even a very large organization, frankly, a fairly small organization, you still have a whole bunch of other people who are still there, who have a massive amount of domain knowledge sitting in their heads. And so this creating this dynamic where, well, it's them and it's us, is not a successful way of driving transformation. And so transformation requires the building of people inside your organization. That doesn't mean to say that you should not be hiring new people from the outside with other skills. Of course we should. We should always be attempting to get new ideas. But you do not transform your organization by not transforming your organization. You transform your organization by ensuring that through the practices, the examples that I gave earlier, this idea of this is an example of how one works, right? Using that, not only with the new people that you've brought in, but also the people who are providing a lot of the domain knowledge, the systems from which you are perhaps migrating. These people need to be involved, and in many cases, there's a huge amount of value and adoption and uptake, and that's how you transform the organization. You transform it by meeting people where they are and giving them an opportunity to see how working differently actually works. And so, we've tried to take that kind of inclusive kind of approach, and given that we are in all of our major markets with Plato, given that we have some real business results in organizations that are working on both digital, new, shiny applications and that kind of thing, as well as core banking applications, I think we've had a measure of success. But it's part of our commitment to really trying to realize what transforming the organization really means, what it means for us to become more like a software company.
Got it.
So it's a continual thing that we work on.
Got it. Now, open source has been a really important focus in your approach and strategy around your technology decisions. And love to hear a bit more about that, but also the step you've taken of taking your technology and then turning around and open sourcing it out as well. So where did that stem from, and how has it been working? So from an open source point of view, really the proposition around open source for me is really very, very clear. I mean, there's three key things. One, the discipline of developing or engineering against a public repo, to which you then have to contribute yourself, and from which you then have to validate and approve pull requests, etc.,
requires you to establish a set of software practices that are a lot more disciplined than if we were, frankly, marking our own homework inside our own team. And that's not to say that people don't follow the right processes internally. It's just that by creating an open source model, it really makes sure you do. So it drives great discipline. And by the way, that great discipline not only works for the team and the open source community, it also works for the team and the teams inside the organization, Scotiabank, that we are working with as they contribute to our products as well. So it also drives discipline in terms of answering the question, well, what do we mean when we say that we want our customers, our users, the other engineers and the other parts of the organizations to be contributing back code to us? So software discipline is a fundamental reason. The second thing is, frankly, if we are trying to attract the best engineering talent in the world, which we are, and we're hiring, just saying.
If any of you are in the room.
But if we're trying to do that, well, shouldn't we look like a software company? And software companies today make a contribution back to the community, back to the engineering community. And so I think we should do that. And then thirdly, if we are contributing to the community, well, it stands to reason that nobody is as smart as all of us. And so if that is the case, well, it would be great if the problems that we thought were important, such as in the case of Accelerator, it would be great if we could get you all to help make it even better. And so, I mean, the real fundamental impetus behind all open source is that if we have all of the minds of the software universe working on a thing, chances are we're going to come up with a better solution. And we truly believe that. And so, based on that value proposition, what we then have to do is we then have to put in place processes internally to make sure that the code that we release is appropriately secure and that it is appropriately managed. And of course, we have to do that. But of course, you have to do that anyway. And so to the extent that releasing open source software means that obviously there is software that is in code form available on a repository, is not fundamentally different to the kinds of checks that you should be doing to ensure that the software that you're releasing, even if it doesn't have to be published software in code form, is also secure and is also written in a way that doesn't expose security issues, things like that. And so from that point of view, there's a lot of process work that we do. There's a lot of controls, and we ensure that the team releasing a particular piece gets an independent review from another team. And so there's some basic things that we're doing to try and drive quality as well as safety. Mm-hmm. But I think that, Scotiabank's focus, and it's something we talk about internally around performance orientation. We want to be a high-performing company, and being a high-performing company means that we have to benchmark ourselves against the best in the world. And if you want to be a software company, we should be holding ourselves to a software company bar.
Got it.
And so we want our software in the same place as you would find any other leading software company software.
All right, but I have to ask, did it take, what did it take, I should say, to get maybe your security team and your compliance team comfortable with the idea that you're going to open source your code, and then you're going to take it back in and run it and kind of work it in that way? I was thinking the combination of a highly regulated and a more conservative, from a governmental perspective, more policies in Canada than other places, and so, but you navigated those things. So interested, what did that journey look like? Maybe they don't know.
Wow, what a way to find out. Yes. If you're watching the video. To be honest with you, and I'm not being glib, the same approach we used for, I think, driving adoption of the platform was the same approach we used with open source. And what I mean by that is building a little bit of credibility. Building a little bit of credibility and inclusion of people from the control functions, whether it's security, privacy, regulation, whatever. Building that relationship, building the transparency of what we do because they are part of the team with us. That was extremely helpful in just developing understanding as to why the strategy was a good idea. And how we could honestly learn from each other as to how to make this safe. The reality is we don't want to create a process that puts our bank or our customer data at risk.
Good.
We want to create a safe and secure process, and so we value the comments of our control functions to help us be honest. And how that becomes productive and is productive is by ensuring, again, that we don't have this them and us situation. So, we have all of these colleagues involved. Literally, they sit in the Plato offices. They are part of the team. And so having these contributions right from the beginning, we're one team trying to move towards one outcome, has, I think, been effective. It's just creating those relationships up front. And honestly, I think it's transparency. Just making it very, very clear that this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying to achieve. We will share openly whatever we're up to because we actually want to be safe.
Got it.
We don't want to put the bank at risk. And I think just taking that authentic approach is helpful, and it produces a good outcome.
Got it. And I do think that I hear that a lot, particularly from more regulated customers, that how do they get that that partnership, that trust, that peer? And so again, in a similar situation, you basically made it embedded in part of the team and had an incredible inclusive approach through the whole journey. Yeah,
I mean, we talk about DevOps, and we talk about, there's Dev and there's Ops, and we need to bring them together. And then we have DevSecOps as a new thing. It's a term I hate, by the way, because where does it end? Do you have DevSecOps marketing, MarkOps? So the point is minimize feedback loops.
Shorten feedback loops.
Right? So you should do that with your control functions.
Got it.
I mean, I honestly think it's that simple, because this creation, you don't transform your security organization or a regulation function or yourself by trying to avoid the problem. So what we have to do is we have to all sit down together and say, well, this is why we think it's a good idea. This is what we think the business value is. This is why it's good for our customers. This is why it's good for our bank. And this is what we need to do in order to make it safe. Okay. And if everyone is clear that they're all on that same page, I mean, sometimes there are some difficult conversations where you really have to try and get to the detail of actually what the risk is or what the solution is.
Sure.
And I think that this produces better engineering. Of course, it helps if you have great engineers.
It does. You could deliver and get people's trust when you do that.
Which we do.
Thank goodness, and I know you're hiring. So the last question before we open it up to the room, so think about some questions you might want to ask. We'll have good time for that. Where's next from the cloud platform you built, the Plato, and kind of your adoption of cloud in a double way of what do you see yourself building in this platform layer versus expecting and looking to public cloud providers to do? And then kind of how do you think from a on-premises to cloud, kind of that combination where you're leaning as well?
Yeah, I think that our focus going forward is certainly going to be increasingly on the migration of so-called heritage or legacy technologies. So, the support for things like COBOL and RPG is important. We want to, again, transform the code base of the bank. You don't do that by not touching it. So we have to deal with these. So there'll be a lot of focus on that. There's certainly a great deal of focus on creating a real-time streaming event layer, which we've been talking about recently. And essentially, what that allows us to do is it allows us to create an isolation layer between all of the consuming applications and the APIs and all of our back-end technology at one identical time point. So everything is at a particular point in time, which of course, when you're dealing with very old systems, getting systems to agree on the timestamp of a particular transaction is actually an interesting engineering challenge in itself. So, some applications will run on batch and not real time. And some applications will, be updated every week. And so this real-time layer, I think, is an important thing that we're working on, the event layer. And essentially, what we are moving towards is really beginning to understand how we use these new technologies, these new capabilities within the teams that have worked on them, to start applying that to the heritage and legacy technology migration problem.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And that begins to get into some very, very interesting engineering around the data. So mapping the legacy data to a common enterprise data model, ensuring that enterprise data model is well-defined in terms of role-based access, security, things like that, tagging for consent, privacy, all of those kinds of questions. But then also ensuring that the enterprise data model that we then are creating is able to be used in powerful new ways for analytics, on the cloud. But the trick is to understand how you break up these applications and refactor these applications in small pieces. And so, I often say to engineers who are interviewing with us, it's fine if you work at an engineering company, at an internet company, and you work on all of this cool new internet technology. It's great. There's good engineering challenges there. But if you want a real engineering challenge, we have some real engineering challenges, right? I mean, some really interesting ideas about how do we get data from, where it is, mapped, understood, controlled, secured, up to the cloud, and then consumed in a multiple number of different ways. Whether it be for analytics, whether it be in real time for an application, a mobile application, or it may also be by another heritage application. And so just understanding what those flows are, I think, is a fascinating engineering challenge right now.
For sure, a hard one.
Yes.
You need good engineers for that.
Yeah, that's why we're hiring, yeah.
Put that back out there. All right, so open it up to questions. There's a mic on each area on the front. If you have anything you would like to ask Justin about in terms of his project or the journey he's been on. I know the first person has to be brave. Come up. Oh, look at that. Brave
There we go.
person.
So Justin, was cloud first important for your organization at the top level, or did you guys address, did each business unit approach a cloud first strategy?
No, cloud first was a top-line strategy in the organization. However, we had to show the value in each organization. One of the things that you have to be careful of with top-down mandates is top-down mandates get you a try, right? Meaning the people who are following the mandate have to give you a try. But in order to get a second one, you need to succeed the first time. And so even organizations that have this mandate, you have to do cloud, still need to have teams that are executing and really delivering on the value. And so, often people talk about, well, we need the top-down mandate, and then we also need the support in the organization. I honestly think that it's part of the same continuum. And I've seen transformation approaches. At Scotia, we've been very lucky because we've had this top-down mandate, but I've seen transformation approaches work where you had a small team went and proved it in one area, one small organization, showed it to everybody, communicated it to everybody, and said, who wants to do another one? One or two teams put their hands up and said, yes, I'd like to do one. And pretty soon that turned into a top-line mandate, where senior executives then said, well, looks like we should do that. And so, something that I think we need to be very, very careful of as technologists and as leaders of change, be careful of the word mandate. Because in some cases, I think it can give us an excuse for not taking control of driving the change ourselves and not showing the benefits that we believe in. I honestly think if you have a cloud program or a cloud team and you show some real business benefit, I would be amazed if you didn't get at least one or two other customers next in queue saying, I'll give that a shot. Does that help? Sure.
I have one question. You had mentioned about building an ecosystem for application development. Are there any other innovative ecosystems that you're looking on from 2-year, 3-year roadmap?
What kind of ecosystems are you referring to?
You mentioned about ecosystem for application development. You talked about DevOps. You talked about building application delivery faster, bringing value to the customers, minimizing the feedback loop. Is there anything else that's on the horizon from building an ecosystem other than from application development?
Oh, I see what you mean. Certainly, we're working. Let me think about how to answer this. Historically, there's been two groups. Well, there's been many groups, but let's pretend there's two, okay, for the purposes of this example. There's two groups. You've got the application developers over here, and you have data people over here. And even if you have a look, organizationally, look at the tools, and look at the techniques, and look at the blogs, how much data conversation is happening in the DevOps world? I mean, it's pretty thin. And so there's always been the situation, we've got application development over here, and then you've got these data people over here. And so a major focus for us, and we have a fantastic chief data officer at Scotiabank, and a real focus on getting our data well understood and embracing all of the value that we can get from the data. And in order to do that, we need to start treating data like the first-class citizen that it is. And so what we want is we want to develop an ecosystem where people are able to search for and understand data in just the same way as you might an API.
Okay. Thank you.
So a data ecosystem is massively important. And honestly, if you think about it, what is the difference between that and an API anyway? I mean, if we do this job properly, we should have semantic similarity between, or semantic consistency, from the front to the back.
That does also tie into the Microsoft Open Data Initiative too, right? Unifying the data.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, that's a good point.
Good plug. Nice job.
Yeah. Open data.
Any other questions?
We've been going down the same journey as well, and as we get further up our stack into your production environments, we're moving more to a hands-off environment. So developers are totally on board, engineers are totally on board. Our ops guys are now going into an environment where we go, production's read-only. We're not giving you your write access, because the moment I give you write, you can undo what I've done. And how did you, I'm assuming you have this, you would have gone through the same challenges of your ops guys who are used to popping on a box, figuring it out, make a quick change, go away. He goes on vacation, 2 weeks later the box goes down because no one remembers what Henry did on the box.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, firstly, and obviously you know this, I mean, it's insecure. So it's a security problem allowing that to happen in any case. And so from an organizational positioning point of view, it's important to obviously communicate that message. But from a change perspective, from understanding how to get the ops organization to understand their changed role, there need to be some ops people who have understood and who have participated in this new model. Because again, when we think about DevOps, and we say, well, we're going to essentially, put the two together, it doesn't mean no ops. In some organizations, it may mean no ops, and that's a different conversation. But what it means is we still need the underlying capabilities, the underlying practices, and the knowledge of people who really understand the operating environments. Now, if you consider some of the issues that we have when we are doing continuous integration or continuous delivery, and we are hopefully pushing nightly builds, the so-called ops people have to be involved. And so the involvement in that high-velocity process, the ability for an operations person to literally see the velocity of change that's going through and how they are working on driving that application continually, particularly if you're beginning to get feedback from the application that the changes that you've driven are driving real customer value, which if you listen to Ryan's presentation tomorrow, we'll talk about a little bit. I've never seen an ops person say, oh, thanks for this experience, I want to go back to the old way. I've honestly never seen it happen. And so I think, again, the approach is, instead of trying to change ops as an entire discipline, you need to try and identify some people who can be part of these initial projects. And being part of these initial projects helps you begin to understand and be able to express in terms that are meaningful for operations people, to operations people, to the other operations people, this is the kind of thing that we need to start thinking about.
So yeah, so we have a small ops, cloud ops, and we have
Big ops.
legacy ops.
Right.
And we're just over that inflection of, we've got our first big app, and I've got 6 apps in the queue right now. Like, we know the flood's coming. And my worry is, will that small ops be able to change the legacy, that massive legacy ops organization?
Yep.
Has their own metrics, their own profit, like,
How much automation do you use in the legacy ops world?
not that much.
Right. So not many people like doing exactly the same task 500 times a month.
Surprisingly, our ops guys do. and our ops is a third-party company, right? So there's also this financial metrics.
Okay.
Every time they do something,
Right.
it's money.
Yeah, I mean, obviously not knowing the details, what I would say is that in general, your ability to be able to show to your business the value of automation.
Yep.
If it's a third-party organization, there's some economic value that comes from that. If it's not a third-party organization, there's still economic value that comes from reducing the number of steps that you have to take manually and the time that it takes, and the reduction that you get through automation, I think is very real, and it's an easy benefit to show. But in my experience, operations people would rather be spending their time on interesting operations problems, working on how to, scale something better, how to, tune it better, rather than having to write basic scripts to just reload environments, or reset databases. And so, certainly from an internal point of view, the sharing of automation practices, the sharing of the tools that you might write in your cloud ops organization to automate the building and provisioning of environments, I think that would be very interesting to your so-called legacy ops organization. Now, I understand that there's a third-party dynamic, and I don't know how that works. It's an interesting choice to completely outsource operations.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Justin.
Hi.
How big is the environment? How much workloads do you have in Azure Cloud at this moment?
So we have mobile and internet banks running in all of our major markets. So Mexico, Peru, Chile, Colombia, and Canada. We also have a notifications platform, which is responsible for giving the customers in Canada notification of all changes on their accounts. So, when I spend on my credit card, I get an email or an SMS or something to indicate that a transaction's occurred. And so all of these are essentially on the platform. And then we also have standardized customer authentication, which is, of course, used in a number of different contexts, and that's also part of the platform. So we are fairly pervasive. We still have some more edges to look at.
Are those all DevOps teams who are deploying the software?
I would say that the teams that we have worked with, we have attempted to make as full stack as possible.
Okay.
But different organizations are in different places. There's slightly different challenges and different technologies, particularly when you get to some of the core banking platforms that are complicated and they have complex regression tests and things like that. It can become a little bit different. So it's difficult to take a textbook approach. But by and large, when we have implemented the platform, we have attempted to not only implement the technology, but also the practices and some of the organizational thinking that goes with it.
So how does
But it's not a cookie cutter, is what I'm saying.
the governance between the DevOps teams and the platform, what changed there? Because I'm also working at the bank, and in the old school world, it was slow and you had to run and a change.
Yep.
And that doesn't work in the cloud world because then you're slow.
Yeah.
I'm very curious, what did you learn from changing that governance in relation to the platform and the DevOps teams? And
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, being very, very focused on automated testing is absolutely critical in order to enable change. So that's a pretty obvious one. However, and I think I mentioned it earlier, if you take the existing operational process that is required in order for you to manage change, so the change management process, and you take that process and you then think, okay, for each one of those steps, and I'm sure it's got checklists and goodness knows what all the way throughout, right? And it's, you know, you need a degree in graph theory to like trace your way through it. Yep, I feel you. So if you take that and you then think, okay, how can we automate every form? Right, you've misunderstood the problem.
yes,
Right? And so what we did was we tried to understand, well, what are the actual control objectives?
what are the risks you're trying
Exactly.
to?
So what are the risks that we're trying to manage? What are the areas of control that we need to understand, and then what does it look like in this world? Now, it turns out, that's what I said earlier, remember, you need to change how your organization functions sometimes in order to exploit the capabilities of technology.
The mindset.
Right? And so now, given that we now have some capabilities of technology around automation, around some of the automated testing, the continuous integration, all of those kinds of things, because we have this, how does it enable us to meet those control objectives in a way that when this process was first written, just wasn't possible? And again, if you're involving your control functions early in the process, they want you to be safe. You want to be safe. You want to be consistent, and they want you to be consistent. But often I think the mistake that organizations make is it turns into this, oh, hold on, we have this new thing, and obviously it's better. And this old thing is just obviously bad. And so this thing needs to replace this thing. And unfortunately, that doesn't mean anything. Because the reality is for your organization, this thing is probably necessary for large parts of your organization that you haven't gotten to changing yet. You can't have nothing. So therefore the question is, so what does the next step as you begin to iterate and understand what a better change management process looks like? Well, it's probably identifying a part of the existing process, just trying to improve that. Because again, we tend to make it's an unlean approach we take. So when we deliver software, we think in terms of lean, right, in small batches. But then when we think of change, we seem to completely forget that, and we think, right, I want to change the entire operations process. Nothing else will do. And it's difficult because this thing has grown over like 40 years, and so pick an area. And so in our case, we literally managed to, cut in half the number of steps in the actual change management process.
You mean like reduce it?
Yes, cut in half. And a large number of those that then remained were then automated. And that was done with our operations colleagues, with our security colleagues, etc.
Nice.
So it can be done, but again,
Step by step.
pick an area of the operations process, try and automate that, involve your colleagues in that process, track the value that you get. If you find some operations people and they tell you, you know what, I used to spend half of my week doing this, and now I spend 2 hours.
Huge win.
Massive win.
Thank you a lot.
All right, we have a last question because I still have one last burning question. So we'll have our final question, and then I get mine.
Ooh, excited.
So if some of the financial services organisations that we work with in the UK, you're often talking many thousands of developers. Mm-hmm. So the question we always get asked is, how are you scaling these initiatives? Are you DevOps dojos, online learning management systems? I'm just curious as to what do you see as the right way to sort of scale these DevOps transformation and change initiatives, particularly at the education and personal change growth level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't run a training course. So what I mean by that is, I'm sure many of you have been through this. Some organizations, particularly when they are adopting new practices or technologies, it could be agile, it could be some new tool, whatever. They think, okay, we're completely committed to this. We'll go and train 3,000 people. And then they wonder why there hasn't been wholesale organizational change. As it turns out, the classroom is not reality. And so in scaling, we have to be careful that scaling is not a function of people, knowing how to log into Azure, right? Or having passed some certification on Puppet, right? So what is it? Well, it's actual experience working on a project. And I honestly think that's the only way to scale. Something that I often say is, don't worry about scale until it's a problem. And a lot of organizations that say, oh, how do we scale this, haven't done a single project. So you haven't done a single project, but you're worrying about how to scale it to 5,000 developers. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So you will have a scale problem when you suddenly have, because you've proven your proposition, you suddenly have so much more demand than you have supply. That's when you have a scale problem. And you know what? That's a great place to be. Right? And so when you're in that position, then it just becomes a question of how you use the people who have been that core and how you start enabling them to start leading and influencing teams that then start doing this. Right? And so it's through, multiplying. And I think as change leaders, I think that's what we have to be. We have to be multipliers of people. So the 10 people who started in that first project, those 10 people, maybe half of them really want to go on and perhaps play a leadership role or more of a leader type role in the next project. Well, those are 5 more projects that you have.
Cool, thank you.
All right. Hardest question.
Okay, hit me.
You ready?
Yeah.
When's your birthday?
Oof, tough one. My birthday was yesterday.
I heard about this.
Yeah,
and I
my
heard you
birthday
spent it
was-
on an airplane.
I did. I spent
I
it
felt
on.
like we could do better.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
Happy birthday to
Thank you.
Happy birthday, dear Justin. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So, very happy birthday. Thank you for
Thank you very
choosing to
much.
spend your birthday on an airplane coming here to Ignite and Envision to speak to all these people. And thank you
you.
so much for your time, sharing your insights, sharing your wisdom, and sharing your perspective. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was great to be with you all. Thank you. Thank you.